Good afternoon, listeners, and welcome back to PW Grocer's Environmental Echo. I'm Paul Boyce, President and CEO of PW Grocer, and your host for today. And I want to welcome you to join us with Dr. Chris Gobler in our second half, or our second part of our two-part series of our discussion with him.
Back to the wastewater component. My firm, as environmental engineers, we are routinely involved in the design of a variety of wastewater treatment systems, down from single-family residential stuff to regional applications of sewering, and treatment plants, to try to mitigate some of this nitrogen issues here. What do you think? What's in your opinion? What's the best way to address, the wastewater aspect of the nitrogen? We mentioned all these unsewered homes that are on septic systems. A lot of them are outdated and they're not working that great, and they don't really remove a whole lot of nitrogen.
Yeah. Well, the old systems, frankly, we don't think they move any nitrogen, or very, very little. So, I think the solution is going to be largely on-site systems, with some opportunities for sewering. And the reason I say that is just because all the economic studies that I've seen essentially show that, if you're going to, for example, as I know you're aware, in the Massachusetts Shirley Peninsula, there was federal funding, and they've got hundreds of millions of dollars to build a new sewage treatment plant and hook up new neighborhoods to that sewage treatment plant. But you take the number of homes you're going to get and you divide by the total cost of the project, and you're looking at, I believe the number is over $120,000 per home. And Suffolk County's Reclaim Our Water site, if you look at what they're quoting for an on-site system, it's the quotes are $20,000 for 3-bedroom, $25,000 for 4-bedroom. Now, in the end, and it can be more than that, of course, particularly if you get a tricky install, and sometimes it's easy. Those numbers are probably the ideal case scenario. But I guess no matter how you slice the pie, you're going to get more bang for the dollar, more bang for the buck, with the on-site systems. Now, there's probably makes sense in areas where there's already sewage treatment plants, to extend, and plants the capacity can be increased to extend sewer lines, and there may be, it may be a more cost-effective approach in that case to upgrade the plant, extend the sewer lines, and you're going to get more homes up there. And of course, sewage treatment plants, once people are connected, at least the homeowners need to do anything, right? They'll have to pay their sewer bill.
You got it. They're not always happy about that.
Right. Yeah, that's obviously an additional cost. Yeah. So.
Well, on that topic, the Center for Clean Water Technology, are you guys looking into any newer or more innovative alternatives besides like septic systems and sewers?
Yeah, well, we're looking into, and we've pursued a variety of approaches, and they run the gamut. I think I can essentially put them into two buckets, I guess. And one would be addressing on-site systems, and then the other would be addressing what we would call legacy nitrogen. And so, for example, we have designed our own septic system called the nitrogen removing biofilter. This was provisionally approved for installation by the public by Suffolk County earlier this year. It's actually the best performing system tested in Suffolk County when it comes to nitrogen effluent. It gets down to 11 milligrams per liter, which outperforms every other system tested, and that's amongst, I think, approaching 24 systems. And on top of removing nitrogen, what the system also does is remove all sorts of other contaminants, drugs, pharmaceuticals, and solvents, and
Wow.
removes them at rates that are actually better than a sewage treatment plant. And there's no other system out there that can, make this claim, because people haven't measured it. And these systems are very, very simple. They're based on a drain field design, which is actually how most of the nation deals with on-site wastewater. But it's the idea of having a drain field that's a layer of sand with a layer of sand and wood chips underneath. And it's that layer of sand that has lots of oxygen in it, and that's where we get the removal of the contaminants. It also converts ammonia to nitrate, and it's in the lower layer with the wood chips that is in an anoxic zone or an anaerobic zone where we get the denitrification. So we're very excited about that as one of the approved IA systems. We've also developed something called building off of the idea of the wood chips that we use in the NRB. We've developed something called a wood chip box, which is essentially what we call a polishing unit that can be installed on any commercial IA system and can get the nitrate in many cases down to almost zero. So the other systems, maybe they get down to 15 or so, but so any of the nitrate that's in that leftover, this can wipe that out. And then both of those we've done installs, and we've got, for example, about 30 NRBs installed thus far. We're looking to get many more. And then we're also innovating on additional designs. We have an all-in-one sort of box system that we're working on right now. It's called Flex Treat. It's not ready for installation yet, but it's doing very well. We're getting 10 milligrams per liter with that, and we're hoping to be able to spring that on the public in the near future. And we're also looking into what we call septic retrofits, and the possibility of, if someone already has just a septic tank and a leaching ring, are there ways to really not have to take that out and just work with what's there and upgrade that and make it function better for removing nitrogen?
Man, that is really cool stuff. And I've heard of the wood chip stuff before, but my follow-up question is, obviously it's organic. Does it degrade over time? How long do these things last? When do you have to regenerate or replace the wood chip layer?
Yeah. So first I'll speak to, the first thing I'll say is that wherever we have the wood chips, it's always in an area that's devoid of nitrogen, right? Because we want denitrification that only happens in the absence of nitrogen. And as it turns out, the organisms that would break down wood chips would be bacteria, maybe fungus. If they have to switch from aerobic respiration to anaerobic, which they do because it's anoxic, their rates of metabolism drop 20-fold. And so because the microbes are growing 20-fold slower, the rates of that wood degradation is slower as well. And I always like to give the story that I've been to places before. I actually in Europe, a place called a fjord, which is like an estuary there. Bottom of those estuaries tend to be anoxic because there's a still at the end of them. And so anyway, I went to visit one of those once in Denmark. There was a museum on the fjord, and they had a Viking ship in that museum that looked just like a Viking ship, right? And it was 1,000 years old. And the reason that the wood was still intact is that because it was down in this anoxic fjord. And I heard a parallel story about a ship pulled out of the Great Lakes recently as well.
Oh man, that's awesome. That's really good to hear. So this, I'm not going to say anything's indefinite, but that makes me feel, as an engineer, we go to install these things, telling people that it's going to last a lot longer than you think. So
yeah.
fantastic.
And I'll also just mention the wood chip box, which we have a variety of the nitrogen-reducing biofilter, where we have a sand layer that goes right to a box or the box that goes onto an IA system. The box is built, and the motivation for it is that you can actually access those wood chips. So if there were some point in time where, whether you felt that the wood chips were not functioning optimally, or if you ran into some sort of hydraulic issue, you could actually go in, open up the box, and you can take out those wood chips and replace them.
Even better. All right, so we're getting close to the end. I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but there's one more area before we wrap up. Lake Agawam in Southampton. That's called press lately. My office has been, on the fringes of it and whatnot. So we're really interested. We're really excited. What's being done out there to improve the water quality? Quickly, if you can just tell us, what's really the issue with the lake?
Yeah, so Lake Agawam, like actually all the water bodies in Long Island were built during the last glacial retreat, right? So it's like it's right on the ocean there, and it was carved out by a glacier, and at that point had just like an ocean beach would, just sand on the bottom, and it was beautiful lake. And I even know people that as early, I know a man, Tim Corwin in Southampton. His grandfather had swimming lessons in Lake Agawam, right? So it was really, it was a publicly used lake. But in recent decades, it's really degraded. And I brought up the idea of the sediment in the glacier because now instead of having sand at the bottom, there's, in some places we think 10 feet of mud that's just been accumulating for thousands of years. And, unfortunately, it has a watershed that goes very far north from where it is. There's, thousands of homes in the watershed that are draining wastewater in. There's a main street that's unsewered that's right next to it. And so there's a lot of contaminants, nitrogen, phosphorus, other contaminants that have been, for decades and decades draining into the lake. And because it's a lake, there's no way for those sediments to get out, really. So because it's fresh water, though, instead of having the variety of harmful algal blooms it's been having, are these blue-green algal blooms that do make toxins. The lake has been in not great shape for the past 2 decades. I've actually been studying it for 20 years. It's been, each year it's been green. It's had some good years, some bad years. It has gotten a little bit better in recent years, and I think that's partly a function. They still have the issues, but the village of Southampton has played a very active role in trying to divert runoff away from the lake. So, I mean, literally, when I started working on that lake 20 years ago, the village of Southampton was designed to have all the water purposely drain into the lake. And so when you have a rain event, you just see that there are these storm drains there that are, I think they're 10 by 5 boxes, and that just would fly in. So they've been doing there's been a huge effort in the last decade to divert a lot of that runoff. There's been a lot of effort along the lake to install buffers to prevent runoff going directly into the lake. There's now a plan underway to sewer Main Street in Southampton. I'm working on a project to put in what's known as a permeably reactive barrier. It's actually, that was the original intent. Actually, it's going to end up being what's known as an injection well, PRB, at the north end of the lake. There's the plan to put in what are called algae skimmers in the lake to essentially pull out the harmful algal blooms. And people are starting to upgrade their septic systems. And there's more on the way as well. I've been doing some research on something called a photocatalyst that looks very promising at degrading sediment, specifically organic sediments, I should say. And so, so there's been a lot done, but there's a lot more that needs to be done.
Oh, yeah.
But there's a lot of promise on the horizon for it as well.
So are we putting a dent in it? I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, no, for sure. But we've definitely seen that, there were not 5 years ago or so. I mean, there were some events there that were just plain old scary. Like, we'd get the numbers back on blue-green algae and their toxins, and they were kind of like, did someone make a mistake here? Because it was, it'd be like orders of magnitude bigger than what we see in other systems. But that's sort of, we haven't been seeing those astronomical events. So the blue-green algae are still there. They're still too high. There's still blue-green algal toxins. So there needs to be improvements, but there have already been, thanks to the efforts of the village and the people around, there have been some improvements in the recent past.
All right. So to wrap up and maybe to tie into that, I mean, in my office, we've worked on, estimates of magically we could say sewer the entire county of Suffolk, wave a wand and boom, it's all sewered. How long is it going to take for whatever nitrogen we've put in to sort of flush out and get back to sort of natural or normal levels, we know it's going to be decades, right? So, what does the future hold for Long Island and its water quality issues? Are we making progress? Can we make progress? Just to wrap up, what do you think, Chris?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm incredibly optimistic, and it's partly because of specifically. I was going to say Suffolk County, but actually in both counties, the initiatives underway are really remarkable. And I'll just very briefly call out, because I met with the director of the Division of Water with DEC yesterday, and today he was inspecting. I think it was the final link to take the Bay Park sewage treatment plant over to the Cedar Creek sewage treatment plant. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Oh yeah,
conveyance project, but that's like 70% of the wastewater of Nassau County, and currently it's just discharged right into what we call the Western Bays, and that place has been it's incredibly problematic. When that project kicks off, there's going to be a day where they literally flip the switch, and the wastewater that's been pouring into that system for hundreds of years is suddenly going to stop. I mean, full stop. None of it will go in there, right? And so that's an incredible change, and came about by a lot of federal and state support. And here in Suffolk County, the changes in addressing wastewater in the last put it at 8 years have been remarkable, right? Article 19 passed, and the term I often use for Suffolk County is it's gone from worst to first in the handling of on-site wastewater in this country. And that is that, EPA has even found, prior to what happened, this change in Article 19, EPA literally made declarations that the practices in Suffolk County were illegal for on-site wastewater, right? The injection of wastewater into the drinking water source.
Yep.
So, that's definitely worse when you've got the EPA telling you, you really can't be doing that. But I can say now with Article 19, which is, of course, the legislation that has facilitated the installation of these nitrogen-removing septic systems, I can say with confidence, there's not another county in the country that has a program that's as robust, scientifically based, and aggressive in addressing on-site wastewater, and specifically upgrading these septic systems. Because we're not the only place that's a problem with this. You can go to Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Florida, Maryland. It's a big issue. A quarter of the country's unsewered. And so, a lot of these, in each of those water bodies those states I call out, there are water bodies that are suffering. But, everything is in place now for Suffolk County to make a big turnaround. And they're giving out grants. If you can get $20,000 to upgrade your system. Anybody in Suffolk County can get that. On the East End in Southampton and East Hampton, you can get $40,000 to upgrade your septic system. So, that's really unheard of. There's no other, not only is it the most aggressive upgrade program, but with there's that kind of financing you just can't find anywhere else. So, I am very optimistic that we're on the right path, and they in addition, I should call out, besides Article 19, the sub-watersheds plan, says here we've got 360,000 unsewered units. Here are the 200,000 that we're prioritizing, right? And if you look at the map for where they're calling those out, it's an ugly map in that it's totally not, it's not like we'll just draw a line here, right? They use incredible science to draft out these watersheds to say, okay, step one, make sure we're protecting drinking water sources. And then step two, what water bodies are the most sensitive? And, it's very, very clear the South Shore of Long Island is the one that's really taking the biggest hit from wastewater because it's so shallow, right? That you're not getting the dilution. And it not only is it the shallowest, but as it turns out, it's got this minuscule tidal range. It's a 3-foot tidal range when you go from Shinnecock Bay all the way into Nassau County. You have 9 feet on the North Shore. You can get like 12 feet when you get into New York City. So you got all the wastewater going in a small water body, and it's just sloshing around, not moving. And that's why it's so problematic. And that's why that's the region that was prioritized by Suffolk County in the sub-watersheds plan. So it leaves me optimistic. I do think we've made incredible progress, and we also are you mentioned the decadal time path for that water to get cleaned up. There are ways of addressing that legacy nitrogen also. I mentioned the permeable active barriers. So if you have very contaminated groundwater or nitrate contaminated groundwater, you can install one of those. And then we have in the water solutions when it comes to shellfish and even seaweeds for helping to remove nitrogen as well.
Chris, that is super encouraging, because, excuse me, as I mentioned, if we did nothing other than just turn it off, it's going to take decades.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear you're encouraged, because I'm encouraged, and I'm sure our listeners are.
Great.
Before we wrap up, anything you want to add, or anything we didn't talk about that you think is important to mention?
No, I think we covered it. We've got problems, but we also are in a good spot for solutions. So and like I said, that leaves me optimistic.
That's what I like to tell my engineers. Don't just bring me the problems, bring me the solutions. So that's a good way to end. All right. So I just want to say thank you, Dr. Chris Gobler, for joining us today. It was great having you on. You're very insightful and real good information on these topics we covered. To our listeners, again, just to wrap up, this is the PW Grocer Environmental Echo podcast. I'm Paul Boyce, your host, the president and CEO of PW Grocer. And again, one last way to get a hold of us is through our website, www.pwgrocer.com/podcast. And again, I thank everyone for their time today.